Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi P25013BTL brushless 6-inch pruning chainsaw. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the battery slot. Now the battery slot of this particular tool will accept any of Ryobi's 18-volt batteries, but you're going to be better off using Ryobi's HP batteries because this is an HP tool and it's going to be able to take advantage of that better cell quality and higher amperage rate. Now, when it comes to the battery slot itself, it's completely acceptable. There's only a minimal amount of looseness or play, and I haven't had any issues with it dropping batteries, and the runtime seems to be fairly, well, decent. It really does depend on how old your batteries are, what kind of batteries you're using, what kind of wood you're cutting. There's a lot of different variables that can come into play, but from my experience, it seemed to do a fairly decent job, and I'm happy with its performance, so it gets a pass for me. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the grip and ergonomics of the tool. Now, the grip on this particular tool is very comfortable and has a nice rubberized texture for one-handed, well, performance. There is another area on top of the motor housing which will allow you to grip it if you need a little bit more control or if you need to use two hands. And the ergonomics of the tool are fairly decent as well. It pairs fairly nice with a 4 amp hour battery distributing the weight between the front and back end, and is easy to use on top of a ladder or in awkward positions if you so need to. It is definitely designed to be a one-handed chainsaw, so you can use your other hand in order to grip things such as the limb you were cutting or a ladder or something else. And so, well, quite frankly, there really is not much else to say. I think the ergonomics on this particular tool are good, and the lightweight and the compactness of it make it a very handy tool in, well, situations where a lighter tool is needed. So yeah, at the end of the day, really no complaints when it comes to the grip or ergonomics on this tool, and it gets a pass. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the trigger and safety. Now the trigger and safety on this particular tool are, well, fairly standard. In order to pull the trigger, you will have to push the safety over each and every time since it's an always-on safety. The safety can be deactivated from either the left or right side, meaning that this tool is right-handed or left-handed friendly. And yep, that's about the size of it. Now, when it comes to the trigger on this particular tool is made out of black plastic with indentations that have been molded in with a slight bit of texturing to the plastic to allow you to have fairly good control over it. And that control can be helpful since it features a variable speed motor. But to be honest, 99.9% of people probably are just going to be using this at full speed every single time, so it's probably not going to be that big of a deal to you. And to be fair, well, it is only an 18-volt chainsaw, so you don't really have much options anyway, because the lower speeds aren't going to be all that effective at cutting it through anything anyway. So yeah, while the variable speed motor is a nice feature to have, it probably isn't actually all that necessary on this particular tool, since it doesn't have that much torque to begin with. So yeah, at the end of the day, both the trigger and safety are completely acceptable, and there are no ugly surprises here. So let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the clutch cover as well as the chain tightening knob as well as the attachment screw for the cover, which is part of the knob. But with that being said, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a disclaimer and say this is not a good system right off the bat, unfortunately. I really do like toolless systems, and I really like the toolless system that is featured on my Black & Decker chainsaw. I think that one works very well, and I haven't had any issues with that one. This particular system, I've had nothing but headaches since I opened up the box on this particular tool. My problem is, after 1 or 2 uses, the area that is supposed to remain free of debris so that you can easily adjust the tension or the bar on this particular tool fills up with debris, and then you won't be able to adjust the tension of the blade because it won't have anywhere for the bar to move to, and so you won't be able to tighten the chain or remove the chain or anything like that without fully disassembling the tool to remove the debris that has filled up in the little gap. Overall, this means that the tolerances are too tight and there is a bit of a design flaw where debris can enter but not fall free. So yeah, I just don't think this is a good design, and I think Ryobi knows it's not a good design because they've been replacing this particular chainsaw in the stores with a newer model that features a wrench for adjusting the tension of the chain versus the toolless system, which I think is a pity because in real world scenarios, toolless systems make more sense, but unfortunately this just was not a good design. Another problem with the design would be the little lever or flap that pops up that you turn in order to attach the cover to the tool. It's just too small, and it doesn't give you any sort of confidence that you have the cover fully tightened down, because it just doesn't feel like you can get a good enough grip. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, this is definitely a major red flag on this particular tool, and I would highly recommend looking at the newer model that Ryobi just released that sort of replaces this particular tool rather than this particular model. The toolless design is definitely a temptation, but unfortunately Ryobi did not do a good job in designing it, and I would have to highly recommend avoiding this particular tool and going with the newer 8-inch version of this particular tool, because I believe that Ryobi's old design using a, well, regular old wrench and a bolt is definitely going to be superior to this design. But with that being said, I haven't actually tried the new one, so who knows, it might actually suffer from the same issue. But I know for a fact that this particular saw suffers from this issue, and I think Ryobi is quietly discontinuing it, even though it's a brand new tool. Although I could be completely wrong on that. But for this particular saw, I would highly recommend looking at the newer 8-inch version. So let's go ahead and move on to the other features on this particular saw. Okay, next up we have the bar and chain, and there actually is good news here. Ryobi has stopped with their old stupid habit of giving you a bar that's too short or doesn't have the advertised amount of cutting room or space, and it is a full 6 inches worth of cutting space on the bar. If the motor can handle it, that's a whole nother story. But there is 6 inches of available cutting room on the bar, and the chain is a fairly decent quality chain, and I haven't had any major issues with it. So, quite frankly, everything here gets a pass. But like I was saying earlier, the motor might not be able to actually handle a full 6-inch bar in every situation. It can in most situations, but there are some situations where the motor did stall out and I would have to restart my cut and redo it once or twice in order to finish through a particularly thick branch. Now, this could depend on what kind of tree you're cutting on and how old the wood is or how long the tree's been dead, if it's gotten harder. But for me personally, there were several different instances where it wasn't able to complete a cut without me having to restart it. So yeah, that is something you need to be aware of, but at least Ryobi is actually including a full-sized or full amount of 6 inches when it comes to the cutting room on their bars, unlike on their previous chainsaw models, which were, well, shortchanging you by about an inch just about every single time. So Ryobi is making small steps to making a better tool, so that is a good thing, I guess. Let's go ahead and move on to the guard. Okay, next up we have the guard. Now, this is actually the first chainsaw I've used that has featured one of these top cover guards, and I was thinking that it might get in the way, and I was pleasantly surprised that it didn't actually get in the way, and it will definitely help protect when you are cutting in a tight area and you don't want to damage surrounding branches or, well, even yourself. So at the end of the day, I think this is actually a fairly useful feature, and it works fairly decently. It's made out of plastic and is mounted on a spring so that it will always flip back into position over the blade when you need it to, and so yeah, I think it's actually a super nice little feature, and it's definitely something that I hope Ryobi continues to incorporate onto their chainsaws. So yeah, let's go ahead and move on. And last but not least, we have the scabbard. And the scabbard is actually fairly well designed on this particular chainsaw. It stays in place nice and securely even if you shake the chainsaw up and down, and fits over both the top guard, bar, and chain completely without any sort of leftover room. So yeah, no real complaints here. It's fairly basic and simple, but it gets the job done, so it gets a pass from me. Moving on. Okay, the tool without a battery weighs 1,284 grams, which is a little under 3 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs 2,002 grams, which is about 4.5 pounds. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about this particular saw in use. Now, this particular saw is going to be ideal for people who are going to be up on top of ladders, reaching into trees at awkward angles, or just basically putting a chainsaw where a typical chainsaw wouldn't be able to fit. So, quite frankly, in those regards, it does an excellent job, as long as the diameter of the branch is under 5 inches in, well, diameter. This saw definitely struggles once you start getting up to about 6 inches in diameter, and at 7 inches in diameter, you're going to be better off picking a different saw. I'm not saying that it won't be able to complete the job, but it's definitely not going to be doing it in nearly as fast of a manner. And if you're looking to sculpt wood or anything like that, definitely not a great saw for that. So, at the end of the day, what is my decision on this saw's performance? Well, I think it's completely acceptable, quite frankly. It's lightweight, it's going to be great for one-handed use, and that's really what it's designed to do, so I think it does a fine job at that. Where it earns a great big F would be the chain tensioning system. There's just too many flaws in this particular design. The fact that you can't get as tight as you want because of how small the knob is and the little flip out thing, and it's made out of plastic, it just does not inspire confidence. The fact that the tensioning area can fill up with debris and cause it not to be able to tension the chain properly is another major red flag, and when that happens, you basically are left with no other options except to, well, disassemble the bar almost completely, and you'll need a flathead screwdriver to do that. So, quite frankly, out in the field, it just isn't a great experience. If all you're going to do is to make a few quick cuts and that's it, and then put it away and clean it, it works just fine. But if your goal is to do a lot of cutting in a single day, you're going to have to, well, take it apart a couple times, and that's not ideal. And then you have to figure out how to get back together again, and it's a little bit funky. It isn't a great experience. Another issue is that little flip up handle knob thing on the dial, or knob on the cover, whatever you want to call it. That thing is not nearly big enough to get a good grip on and to tighten it to the point where you will feel confident that it's not going to become loose. And it just, I don't know. The tightening system on this particular chainsaw is not a great experience. And I have to say that it really disappointed me. I picked this particular saw up during, well, a Ryobi Day event during kind of December, where you could get this and 2 batteries and a charger for $100, and for that price it was acceptable. But now that it's back up to the full price of $150, tool only, I would never pay that much money for this particular tool, quite frankly. So it's really going to be up to you. But with that being said, let's go ahead and recap with the pros and cons. 18 volt. 18 volt means it's going to work with all your Ryobi 18 volt batteries, but like I said earlier, it definitely works best with HP Ryobi batteries. Lightweight. This is a fairly lightweight little chainsaw, and considering its weight, it definitely does a fairly good job at, well, cutting through any sort of branch that is under 5 inches in diameter. So I consider that to be a pro. Grip. Overall, I really do like the grip on this particular tool. It's good enough to use it one-handed, and that's definitely going to come in handy when you're working up on top of ladders. So this is a pro in my opinion. Bar length. Overall, Ryobi actually has 6 inches of usable bar on this particular tool, so I have to give them props for that. Good job, Ryobi. Moving on. Brushless. The brushless motor is definitely going to help you with that torque, and it's going to give you a bit longer runtime, so this is definitely a pro in my opinion. Compact. This is a compact little chainsaw, and it's definitely going to be able to get you into some tight, compact spaces where a 10-inch chainsaw will not be able to get you. So in my opinion, this is a pro. And the first con would be the chain tightening system. Overall, the chain tightening system definitely needs a revamp, and they did do that quietly on a new model. So there's one problem fixed, but not for you if you buy this particular chainsaw. Moving on. And the last con would be the price. It would probably be worth the price that Ryobi is asking for it at $150 tool only if it wasn't for the issue with the chain tightening system. But because of that issue, it is definitely not worth the price. So yeah, definitely a con. Moving on. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular tool. I really like using this tool right up until I have to do anything involving the bar and chain, and unfortunately that's something that is unavoidable with a chainsaw. So quite frankly, I really cannot recommend this particular chainsaw unless you know what you're getting into. And frankly, I think the other chainsaw that Ryobi just released that features the 8-inch bar is going to be a far better option. Sure, it's not toolless, but I think they're going to be fixing most of the issues with this particular chainsaw, and quite frankly, you probably won't be able to find this particular chainsaw anywhere because it's being replaced in all the stores by that newer chainsaw. So this video is probably completely and utterly, well, pointless, but I still made it. Go figure. So yeah, this particular chainsaw will only be recommendable if you can find it during Ryobi days for $100 with 2 batteries and a charger, or if you can find it tool only for less than $80. So yeah. And that's about it. See you next time. God bless.